Hello everyone, welcome back. This video is a follow-on from a previous in the series on Agile software design. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to take the code that was generated as a result of doing a design for the animal maintenance solution, and I'm going to turn that into a working solution. Let's go. Okay, so I've opened Visual Studio and browse to the correct place. I'm going to open the solution that was created for me by the tool. As you can see, I get a solution with nothing in. So that is intentional. The tool does not add projects to the solution for you. That is partially because it's more difficult to do that way, and we don't produce solutions very often. So adding the extra work to do that has not been worthwhile so far. But secondly, I think it's valuable that you're able to structure the solution the way you want, and that's probably solution specific. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to add some folders into which I can place my projects. So if you remember back to the diagram, if you saw that in the design video, we created two applications effectively. They're going to be part of the same solution, but there's a front-end client application which is in Blazor WebAssembly, and then there's a second server application which hosts it. So I'm going to create folders for both of those. There is also a shared assembly shared between the two, which is our CSLA object library. So I'll create a shared folder for that. And finally, there's a test project, a unit test project. So I'll add that to a separate solution as well. Okay, so now we add our projects to these folders. First one I'm going to add is the server project. That's just because the first project that's added is automatically the startup project, so that just saves me having to set that. This will just take a moment just because I'm recording on this machine, so the machine's working quite hard. So the next one I'm going to add, also in the server side of the world, is the data access project. You can do all the others in any order now. Data storage is the next one. This is a little bit slower to add. It's a .NET framework project, that one. It's never been upgraded to be anything else. Good. On the client side, I'm going to first need my WebAssembly project. That's the one that contains the user interface. I'm also going to need my user interface control. That's sort of the equivalent of our code behind. That's where all our user interface control goes, hence the name really. Into our shared folder, we're going to add the objects project. And I'll put the unit tests into their own project for UI control. So I'm not going to do much with the unit test project really. It's not quite ready to go in that there won't be a repository implementation which is suitable for unit testing. Okay, so that's added our projects. The next thing we need to do is to tell the projects about one another so that they understand the idea that they are using functionality, but they don't know where from. So we need to add dependencies between them. So our UI control project makes use of a object library. So we need to add that one. And our WebAssembly project uses our UI control. I'm also going to add the object, although that's not strictly necessary because it would be got via a transitive dependency of the UI control. Our data access project depends upon the contracts which are defined in the objects project. So we can add that one. Data storage doesn't depend on anything else. That's just a definition of a database. And our server project is going to reference a couple of different things. So we need to add a reference to data access so that it pulls in the data access implementation that it's going to make use of. It also uses the object library. And we also need to reference the WebAssembly project. The server project acts as a host for the WebAssembly, so that when someone browses to the site, the WebAssembly is downloaded to their machine. So we need to add a reference so that it's available for that to happen. Our objects project doesn't depend on anything. Our unit test project, I will just set that up just to show you. That's going to depend on user interface control. And again, I'll add the object project, but it's not strictly necessary because of the transitive nature of things. Okay, so we've got a little bit of work to do in order to get the code fixed up. I'm going to start, I think, in the object library. So the first thing that will happen is that I'll get an error raised by an analyzer that runs on CSLA, which is telling me that I ought to do some stuff that I'm not actually very keen on myself personally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the severity of that. I'm going to set it to silent. And go to our read-only object, we'll find that is similarly complaining. So I can turn that one off as well. Hopefully that'll sort that, although adding the second one sometimes doesn't work. It seems to be a bug in Visual Studio. So it might be that we have to do that more than once. We'll see. Okay, so in our data access project, there's probably going to be some missing namespaces, so we will need to resolve that. That is probably also true of our view model. Which is referencing the objects in the object library. And it's also true in the user interface in the WebAssembly project. The fix for that is slightly different in that we need to add a couple of namespaces to the imports.razor so that they're available. So we need our UI control, which is where our view models are, but we also need our objects. That should resolve that. Okay, so if we have a look at our task list window now, the code that we've generated includes a few to-dos that remind us of things that we might need to do. I don't need to do absolutely all of them. The first one is just a reminder that says that our auto discovery of repository classes won't include anything where the name doesn't end with repository, and that includes capitalization. Now, I followed all the defaults, if you like, and created the repository with the right name, so that doesn't matter. But I'm going to leave that to do there, just to remind anyone that comes after me that they might need to do that. So the next one is a reminder in one of our CSLA objects, our editable object, which tells me to add any complex validation authorization rules that cannot be achieved using attributes. I don't need one in here, so that can be removed, that to do. By removing it, I'm just saying I have dealt with this so that no one sees those in the future. The next one is about default values in my editable object. Are there any properties on which I need to set default values beyond the ones that are generated for me for auditing purposes? So there aren't any in this object. If there was a Boolean field that needed to be set to true, obviously that's the opposite from the default for the data type, so I might need to do that. If there was something which was a reference, a key to another data type, another object type, then I might need to set a default value for that, but I don't for this object because it's a pretty straightforward one. So I just delete the reminder. Next ones are about authorization rules. Is there anything I need to do about authorization? Well, we made those decisions already. Those were nice and simple to make, and we did that as part of our design, so there's nothing more to do there, so I can just delete those ones. There's a reminder in the user interface, in the unit test project. There's a method which allows me to change the data on my editable object as part of unit testing to make sure that it's valid. So I'm going to do that while I'm here. So I just need to set values for anything which has a validation rule that says it's a required field. Make sure all of the properties are set to something valid. So that should do that, and I've removed the reminder for that. So the only other reminder that is worth mentioning is there is a reminder about the fact that there's fake authentication here. We would go back to that at the point at which we'd made a decision about how to do authentication, what we needed to do about that, and we added it. But all of those can stay there for the time being. Okay, as I suspected, I still have a problem with that validation rule. So I'm just going to fix that. For some reason, I think it's, as I say, a bug in Visual Studio. When you add the second rule, I think it's adding it to the wrong file. So the two different rules go in two different files for some reason. So that's sorted that. So we've got a little bit of name spacing left to do that we can see in our error list. That will also be the case in the assembly associated with our view models, where we just need to wire a couple of bits up. So there's a missing namespace in unit test project as well. So what we should be able to do at this point, I think we've resolved all of the problems that I would expect at this point. There is one other thing we need to do, which I will do off screen, which is to change the connection string that would be used to access the database. Good. Our object library built okay. Let's check our UI control, make sure that rebuilds all right. Just working up the stack. We could rebuild the whole lot in one go, but I tend to go a level at a time to understand whether there's anything that's not working. Good. Let's make sure data access is building. Yep, it's all looking okay. So let's go for the top. Server project. So there's one project that we haven't worked with at all yet, which is the data storage project. This is as I mentioned a few moments ago, this is a .NET Framework project. .NET Framework projects work slightly differently in that they don't include all the files underneath them using a process called globbing. So we've got to add them manually. So we can do that now. So if we have a look in this, there's nothing here within the folders. The folders exist as part of the project setup, but there's nothing visible to us in terms of files. So we need to turn on show all files. We'll find that some stored procedures that are not included in the project. So we just do that. Right click, include in project at the table, and there's a role as well under the security folder. We include all of those, and then we turn off show all files again to hide all the DLLs and things that go there. That should build. That's the definition of a data store. What we do now is we publish that. I'm going to publish it to my local database server. And it's going to have the name animal maintenance. That looks good. And if I publish that, what happens is that it checks to see if there's a database of that name. If there is, it sees what structure it has and determines whether it needs to make any changes to the structure of the database to fit the latest definition of what the database should be like. So this is just like entity framework migrations, and it's just going to create a database for me with the necessary schema. Obviously it's quite an intelligent migration, just like entity framework does. It needs to make sure that it doesn't drop. If it needs to make a change to a table, it can't drop the table and recreate it. It has to modify the table so that the data in the table is maintained. This one just takes a minute just because it's creating a new database for us, and that takes a little bit longer the very first time it runs. So having a good think about it this time. This machine is working reasonably hard because it's recording. So we'll just give it a moment just to see how it's doing. Now, as long as I've remembered everything, we should at this point have done everything that we need to do. We've made all the changes to make each of the bit of code know about one another. We haven't done anything in terms of how the user interface looks. So as you'll see, when we fire it up, not a lot will happen. We haven't added any links to the user interface in order to access any functionality or anything like that. Okay, there we go. It took 3 minutes for some reason. I'm not sure why it took quite so long. As I say, I am working the machine a bit harder than normal because I'm recording on it. But it shouldn't have taken that long, really. Anyway, we're at the point where we can run the server project and see what happens. Let Visual Studio do its thing. I've run it in debug mode, but in fact I didn't need to do that, really. This will just take a moment to download the WebAssembly project to my machine. I mean, it's not got that far yet, as it happens, but it does take just a moment. This is running .NET Framework, sorry, .NET Core 3.1, this application. I haven't updated it yet to use .NET 6 because CSLA isn't quite ready for prime time for .NET 6 yet. So I've just left it at 3.1. I never did the upgrade to 5 because 5 was only a current release. But it's firing up now. The reason for mentioning that it's .NET Core 3.1 is that there's no pre-rendering turned on. .NET Core 3.1 didn't support pre-rendering in WebAssembly. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are no links on the user interface to the new functionality. I don't try to add that as part of generation because it's unlikely that you would keep this user interface anyway. You're likely to do something else, and I can't possibly know what that is. But we can browse to the URL that we need. It will be called the plural of the thing that we were looking for. And I get an edit screen. It's actually a list which shows me all of the existing animals. And I can add a new animal, give it a name. Red seems common, doesn't it? And kennel reference A1. You can see the highlight around the controls means that validation is firing, so it's checking whether what I'm entering is allowed. If I try to enter something that is invalid, then validation fires correctly. I can save that animal, add another one. Delete and edit. So our application's working. We didn't have to spend an awful long time modifying the code in order to make that the case. Okay, so I've just reviewed the footage. The design there took me half an hour. The design was in a separate video, obviously, but hopefully you've had a look at that one. The design took about half an hour. That includes a fair amount of time explaining what I was doing. Obviously, I would have done that quicker if I had not been recording me doing it. The code changes took 18 minutes up until the point where I started publishing the database, which then took 3 minutes for some reason. So that's not bad. Well under an hour for a task there. Now, that is an idealized task. That's not what we would expect every day of the week, in the sense that we have templates for all those particular things. The demo is obviously chosen to show what the tool is capable of doing in the best case scenario. The intention is not that the code generation replaces developers, far from it, of course. It is a starting point for then doing the customizations, such as changing validation rules, such as making the user interface look better and to fit with the scheme that we've chosen for a particular site, and do all of the other important things which add value, which creating things with properties doesn't really. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look. If you like the tool, then give it a go. Go to getdesigning.dotnotstandard.com. That's the companion website for this video series. On there is a link to the docs site for the DesiGen tool from which you can download and install it. I hope you give it a go.